lonely lord of the stars and space. And it's kind of written in a format where it's like a part at a time, so I don't know how it's going to sound when I squish it all together at once, but just give me a shot then. A prince fell from the stars. As they split apart, the constellations were his wings, and their stories, no longer told, were found on the wayside. He landed on a doomed planet with dying trees and broken dreams, lying like garbage along empty freeways. Once he was revered and thought of as a god. He held his happiness to high esteem, though in later years it was nowhere to be found. A crisis burst forth from his mind, and in his search to find what was missing, a revelation occurred that absolution was deserved, and it drove him forth on empty tracks that humans once drove cars. How could the absence of something weigh so heavily on my back? He asked, resigned. But hope couldn't look him in the eyes and tell him why she was gone, because she had already left. What I will find on this planet is my death. He spoke aloud to the end of the road, and to what lay beyond, a vast, desolate desert that stretched past his line of sight, and it ruined the horizon. It felt like a horrible death, a terrible nightmare. He loped aimlessly through the desert for thousands of years, it seemed, sand dripping from his eyes like tears, and the arid heat took what little moisture and salty feelings his body had left. And what he failed to notice around him, partially buried beneath the sandy expanse, monuments to fallen gods and buildings that at one time scraped the sky, his home that from which he fell. The universe has never taken its eyes off of you, the earth murmured in her dry, reassuring voice. It resounded heavily in his bones, and he stopped before the edge of the desert, because with her words a forest grew to block his path, thick with mystery, and the ache in his heart grew as tall as the trees that stood in his way. I need to reach the sea. Why? So I can drown in it. The earth had no reply, though, and her reluctant kindness drew a path for him through the thick of the trees. It would not be easy for, as crowded as this plethora of the chattering birds and furried sorts, loneliness hung over his head, and he was dimly reminded of interstellar cities filled with people, but none with the time, not for their despondent prince. At first, distance was something he chose, but as distance grows, so does it wear on one. And the deeper he wandered into the trees, the louder his solitude grew, buzzing in his ears like static. The trees, thick as they were a maze. He allowed himself occasional looks at the sky, but only patches showed, and the sight made him want to cry, but he did not. And as the canopy of green was so dense it allowed little sunlight, the lonesome cause buzzing in his ears ceased, and the flora and fauna turned eerily silent. Silence, he found, was so unnaturally loud and present he wished he could hear nothing and think of nothing. However, the large ever-presence of a lack of noise raised no options and no compromise. It told him he must tread on towards the doom he chose to make of himself. And he spoke aloud to the forest, expecting no answer. If green is the color of hope, and with this overabundance of it, I would expect to feel light. Silence resounds, and the longest pause ensued. He collected his stress-filled thoughts that grabbed at his skin, urging him to reconsider the choice of death. And he pushed them to the back of his head, garbled and frantic. The prince breathed in the sultry jungle air, and yet I am heavier than a stone. Silent still as he considered this. Perhaps that will make it easier for the ocean to swallow me. And mountains rose to greatest trek through the wood on either side, forming a great valley, and the trees thinned into a field of overgrown wheat and wildflowers. He cleared the forest, his conscience filled with arguments he did not speak. His bones ached with the years he hadn't grown, and the sky, a piercing, painful blue, stretched thin towards the horizon, and it was with that he knew the deep water was close. The earth, while it was surrounded by the atmosphere, the space it lacked became the sea, where once inside you were weightless but crushed by pressure all the same. He yelled viciously to the open air and land, "Where are you now when I need you most?" Hope, she still did not answer. This was the longest leg of his journey yet. While the sky continued to stretch, the land grew long and the fields refused to cease. The effort taken to walk was momentous, as the mountains that lined up on either side. What he did not know, that yet again the earth, agitated by his decision, decided to stop him once more. Her voice was loud and commanding, and she rose in front of him, ashen-skinned, with flashing gold-green eyes. "You must stop this madness, this quest of yours. You are meant to be so much more." But he replied, "I am old, tired. Everything good has left." She looked at him with the fierce caring of a mother and laughed, her mirth shaking the land. "Old, are you? When you were young and foolish, I saw the rise of civilization harm my body and watched silently as they polluted my children." He could see beyond her intimidating form. A giant cliff loomed with a steep vertical drop into the sea. The prince silently contemplated her words, though his depression cried for him to disregard. It called as a siren's song to guide him to the deep, eternal sleep. She sighed, and the land below her breathed. "You've been corrupted by your own misery." The earth looked on to him in compassion. Behind his beauty lay shame and loneliness. "I know you're kind." He spoke, defeated and tired. "Why won't you let me pass?" "Let me show you something, and if your mind is not changed, you may go to rest." He thought about refusing, but she cut him off, a smile in her voice. "I would like to see you try. Now come with me." They walked north until the sky changed its hue. A sheen lit up the twilight, and stars punctured the night's canvas. Though something within their line sight sat a figure darker than black, and a foul stench, thick and sickening, oozed from it. Many eyes blinked at them, their whites glittering mad with strange wisdom. And they spoke, a rumbling double tone. "Step no further, ask though, as you will." And the figure turned, revealing a giant wolf with 6 legs and a wide, toothy smile. "I've seen you before. And yes, I warned you of your crumbling leadership long ago. A lone wolf will never be lord, and still you disregarded my instruction." The prince looked away, and an irritated smile decorated the wolf's maw. "What are you?" the prince asked. "You called me despair as you walked backwards into the abyss of desolation you created for yourself, youngling," the wolf growled, shaking its giant head. "But I go by a better name, though most would rather turn away and look at anything else except my face. Truth," the prince sighed. Thank you. It's a really heavy thing to follow what went before me, but